Hi, I'm Nick Haig, and welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast. Mats Georgson has spent 35 years in marketing and has worked in senior positions as global brand manager for both Ericsson and Sony Ericsson. He's a brand and strategy expert, having helped hundreds of corporate companies to not only devise but also implement their branding strategies. In addition, he spent 10 years as part-time professor teaching MBA level courses at Stockholm University, and he's the co-author of the world's most used academic textbooks on branding, Kevin Keller's Strategic Brand Management. Mats is more than a branding maestro. He's a visionary in his field, and what sets Mats apart is not just his expertise, but his ability to convey complex ideas in an accessible and engaging manner, which you'll hear firsthand today. Welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast, Mats.
Thank you so much.
Delighted you could join me on the show today. You've spent 35 years in marketing, both on client and agency side. And for 10 years, you've taught branding and business strategy as a part-time professor at Stockholm University. You position yourself as this brand scientist / wizard, and I've never spoken with a brand wizard before. So please tell me more.
Yeah, I think you caught me there. That was one of the things that I didn't really think through like all that much. But now that I think of it, it's actually pretty good because it made me reminisce Arthur C. Clarke, the scientific writer, science fiction writer. He said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indiscernible from magic. So, if you sort of have enough knowledge and enough sort of stuff behind you, you can do things that other people perceive almost as magic. And frankly, I think there is that kind of level of wizardry, because when you work with strategic brand management and you really work heavily onto business strategy as well, there are so many levers you can pull. And with experience and theory and everything behind you, there's always something that sort of delivers pretty good results. And that is, in a way, a wizardry thing. So
Yeah.
Now that you pointed it out to me, I kind of like, hey, that was pretty clever.
Well, you mentioned it there. You mentioned branding, you mentioned strategy, and from your 35 years in marketing and branding, and in your writing as well, you talk a lot about strategy and the fact that a lot of companies don't have one, whilst others think strategy is about getting new tech, embedding AI in their company, or just jumping on whatever else is the latest fad. Why do you think companies struggle so much in getting this clear strategy together in the first instance? Surely that's the starting point to know where you want to go with your business.
Oh, I think there are several factors to that. I think one is that, a lot of people say that, there's such uncertainty. Everything is moving at such a pace that we can't plan ahead. And I think that is completely misunderstanding what strategy is. Strategy is much more than just doing like a Soviet 5-year plan. It is really about discussing how is the world around us changing, and what do we believe in, and what do we think that we should be doing to win in the marketplace. And even if you don't use all the things that you come up with in these discussions, the mere fact that you have these discussions make you better adapt to changing circumstances. So one is that I think that there is like this very silly notion that when the world changes faster, you should sort of talk about it less.
Yeah.
So I think that, it's about cleaning the desk and actually making room for that in the C-suite, that you really, really take strategic issues very seriously, precisely because things are changing very fast. The other aspect, I think, is a lot of companies, I see this, that a lot of companies are kind of, it's tragic almost, like they're almost scared to be strong in giving strategy to their brilliant employees, because they fear that, people are sort of going to turn lawyers on them and hold them accountable for everything that they've said, that you said that our strategy is exactly this, and then that is exactly what we must do. And in fact, I see that it's the opposite. if leaders are willing to lead, if they are willing to point out directions, if they're willing to sort of identify important principles and really share that with people, they get so much back. So I think that there is also like this sort of built up tension where in some companies it goes overboard. Like, management just doesn't want to share anything. So
Yeah.
whenever they do share something, people jump all over it and overanalyze what they're saying and sort of, and then it becomes like a tug of war of this information of where the company is going. It's not fruitful at all. So I think it's many different things that put us in this situation,
Yeah.
but I really think it's time for a reset.
Yeah.
That the higher up in an organization you are, the more you should be concerned with the future, and that is strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think going back to your first point, where things are changing so quickly these days, sometimes it's this confusion between strategy and tactics as well, and the fact that people are flip flopping all over the place, and trying to make these small steps in this short time frame as opposed to setting that strategy. Okay, you might need to amend it over the course of time, but it's long term goals that you're looking to plan to achieve, and sticking on that path with that vision that you got to head towards is so important, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think that, as was pointed out, I mean, many years ago, like not 90% of any strategy, and this was like 20, 30 years ago that Mintzberg found this. 90% of all strategy is not implemented. And everybody thought for a while, like, oh, that's the big failure of any kind of strategic planning. But the point is that it's not planning per se. It's about identifying what is important to the company and just keeping track of that. And what replaces the 90% that is not implemented is emergent strategy, which is because the company then is smart. If they have spent time here, their emergent strategy will simply be better
Mm.
because they have thought about it before and they realize why they can't do what they intended to do, but now they know what they should do instead.
Yeah.
So you get it back anyway. So
Yeah, fully agree. Fully agree. I think the problem companies often face is the fact that there's different types of strategies as well. You talk about creating this chain of strategies that starts with creating the vision, and then is delivered by your business strategy. Why is it important to start with a vision, and how do you connect your business strategy to that vision?
I think, in fact, that what I've tried to do during the years is first of all to boil down the essence of, so to say, the management cornerstones that you need, which is in fact not that many. I think it's four. I think it's vision, business strategy, and then your brand strategy, that is like the external representation of that. And then it's your culture, which is how are you going to do all of that together.
Yeah.
So I think that the first is I don't really start with vision necessarily. I start with the strongest parts of this. If you have like a really strong and set culture, and then you have to figure out, like, how can you tweak this into the business strategy so that you actually make money, and then what kind of vision can you then attain. So I go for like the strongest parts of this chain, um, because it's much easier to sort of build from something that exists and is strong. But
Yeah.
having said that, the importance of vision is that nobody really tends to grasp the entirety of a business strategy. So business strategy has to be reduced to something that people can grasp and understand. And the sort of highest order headline of your strategy is your vision, because it basically says, what's this all about? Well, we want to be over there in the future. We want to reach, sort of say, the Holy Land. How do you get there? Okay, well, we got maybe five fundamental things in our business strategy, which is bam, 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 bam. And now you're kind of interested in the story, right? So I'll tell you a bit more about this. And then you have more of the typical business strategy presentation.
Yeah.
So I think that without the vision, normal mortals will never really be able to sort of grasp like the whole point of it all, and therefore vision becomes very, very important.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes people call it that North Star, don't they? But it's there for the future as a guide, hence
Yeah,
the North Star reference.
yeah,
Uh,
but I also like that vision is in fact an image of the desired future. And I think if you add to that, that you should also express not just what the destination is, but also the value you've created for other people than yourself. Because every organization exists to create more value outside than you sort of take from the right. Because if you
Yeah,
don't create more value than you take out, you're going to be out of business.
yeah,
So the thing is that the vision is actually the only thing that really is able to summarize everything, which is why I think you can toss out mission, you can toss out purpose, you can toss out even your sort of say the value proposition is very much subservient to a vision, because a vision is the only thing that can actually encompass all of the aspects of all the other things.
yeah,
And if you work on a mission instead of having like a kind of a zoo of different things with different headlines, people can just focus on what is important, which is like where are we going and how do we get there?
yeah, yeah. And that business strategy, looking at those internal capabilities on how you're going to deliver against that vision.
Yeah,
So people they set out the vision, they've allocated resources to deliver against that. But the key in business, as you just said, is to create and deliver value, especially for your customers. This is done via a brand and marketing strategy. And they are different, but sometimes merged as one in error by marketers. So, how would you describe the difference between a brand strategy and a marketing strategy?
that is a really good question, and you know there's actually some academic debate on that kind of thing too, because to an extent they will overlap. Because, but I think that the one way of expressing it is more that the brand is something that only resides in the heads of people. So it's like really focusing on what you will become in the minds of people over time and how that will help your business. And that also makes it a bit more like the super tanker, the fixed thing in your strategy, because you can't really be very tactical about it. You have to sort of make up your mind about what this is going to entail. Whereas marketing can range from very strategic things to very, very, very tactical issues. But it is a bit complicated, of course, because I mean, if you have like a product brand like a Mars bar, that Mars bar is actually going to be very closely aligned between brand and marketing, whereas a big, huge company with a corporate brand uh, has sort of say a much wider role, and then you can have marketing on specific product lines, etc., that will sort of differ and also be more agile tactically.
Yeah,
So So I would also add that maybe it's a bit, uh, one shouldn't worry too much. I mean, that the things do overlap sometimes to certain extents. I think that the main point is to remember that brands only reside here. And there are
yeah,
many things that you do in marketing that are sort of say beyond the the play for the customer's mind. So I think that that is like the easiest heuristic to sort of think like, what is really the branding game and what is the marketing game.
yeah. And I think, what people need to remember is branding provides this value inside the company as well, doesn't it? You want your employees to love working for your brand, your company, feel like they're part of the team. And so great branding,
Yeah,
the knock-on effect is that, it's easier to keep people employed, to search for new employees in the marketplace. Branding, it affects all that too.
absolutely so. And I think that it's also the sense making of the world. As I said, I see brand strategy as the external view of the business strategy. I think that this is a very good balance and checks and balances thing, because if you sort of look at it from the brand perspective, you kind of see like, do our uh, corporate strategy decisions really make sense from adding the kind of value that we are making people expect from us? And conversely, are we creating something out there that we're actually aligning to deliver, right?
Yeah,
And I think in many companies, it's been like this thing that you sort of uh, the corporate strategy becomes very, very sort of say egoistical from a company perspective. You just sort of count business opportunities and project like a lot of bar charts into heaven, how much money you're going to make. But there is very little connection in many companies to how that is actually going to take place from creating value for the customer. And when you start sort of really integrating these things, both will get better.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. So, Mats, what advice would you give to listeners out there if they're looking to either create a new brand strategy for their company, or well, I suppose refresh their current brand strategy, or they're looking to create a new brand strategy for the first time? What any takeaways or things that they need to think about in terms of putting that strategy together?
Oh, I would say that I would say that it's probably one of the things in the world that looks the easiest from the outside and is the hardest in reality. So I would say that you really should take it very seriously, do it very in a very structured way, and get help to do it. Because if you are going to do it a little bit like, you know, looking up a few videos on LinkedIn or YouTube and sort of getting inspired and getting people aboard, you get a lot of sort of engagement and um, all of that, but it's going to be as misconstructed as sort of like, just putting people in a room with like household supplies and tell them to like, build a radio from it. It just won't happen. It will look like a brand strategy, but it will not really be a brand strategy. There is an enormous gap between sort of say the everyday layman idea of creating a brand strategy and actually doing something that will work and leverage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. My background is as a market researcher, so I've been involved in various different brand strategies for global corporates as well as mid market companies, and I think definitely having that outsider view to bring a fresh take on the marketplace, guide them, of course. I think my recommendation was always do less and achieve more. I think, keeping the concepts or the attributes to, not this 100 slide deck, but a single slide maybe, so that people can really keep hold of it in their heads. And
Yeah,
then, and sticking with it, we've talked about this long term future vision. And I think, often when people are creating this brand strategy and then the marketing that sits around it, they get bored very quickly, don't they? And they pull it,
yeah,
or, so sticking with that, because, that constant repetition in the marketplace is so important for building that brand position.
absolutely. I would add one thing there, that I do agree that less is more. That's really one of the things that is the typical mistake. Like, people use like a kind of big and fluffy words to describe a brand, even very strong brands. Like, what is companies like Samsung? Oh, they're innovative. What's Apple? Oh, they're innovative too. So obviously, if you sort of stash, like you take a fairly unknown brand, like an insurance, like the UK's number six insurance company or something, and then you slap together like 8 words that is going to be like sort of say what the brand stands for. No, it will never happen because it's just way too much. And it's all just going to come out as like, well, you're an insurance company, aren't you? So what you need to do is to have a brand that is manageable at a lower level than these big fluffy words. So number one, you need fewer fluffy words, and number two, you need to go for something. Understand what I call, brace yourself, the Einstein Chaplin paradox.
Right. Okay.
Sounds cool, right?
Yeah.
The
Tell me more.
Einstein Chaplin paradox is that when they were at the height of their fame, they were like known all across the world. And if you would ask people, like, what is Charlie Chaplin, they would say like, oh, he's a humanistic genius. And if you would ask people about Einstein, they would say, oh, he's a humanistic genius. So at a top level, you would sort of get the identical position, which frankly existed. I mean, the world at that time, ravaged by wars and strife, they needed these sort of positive role models. But one was a comedian and one was a scientist.
Yeah.
So if you look at it, with all the sort of attributes that made Chaplin Chaplin and Einstein Einstein, it was very different. And in fact, the brand platforms of these dudes should not be on the level of humanistic genius. That should be like what you try to get people to say spontaneously. But your management thing should be, what kind of experiences do we deliver to make Chaplin Chaplin? And this simply doesn't exist in most brand platforms. They just can't do that. And then they can't brief their product development. They can't talk to customer service about how to do these things. They so if you do it right, and this is what I mean, like, it cannot be, so to say, uh, kind of a homebrew thing, because it will never really work. If it's really going to work, you have to sort of have all of these things taken into account and see how it can be implemented into the daily lives of people that actually create these brand experiences.
Yeah.
So,
No, I totally get that. And I think, well, if you look at lots of brands and, some of the brand documents that sit behind them, everyone's innovative, everyone's passionate, everyone's customer centric. So you really do need to delve deeper in order to understand that and then deliver against it.
definitely.
Yeah. When we talk about brands, it's often B2C brands that are referenced over B2B brands. Does the role of brand differ if you're a B2B or a B2C brand, or is it the same?
I love that question. And I think that, of course, it differs from brand to brand. But the sharp delineation in my mind is not between B2B and B2C, because uh, I think there are really two variables that I think are maybe the most fundamental in varying it. Number one is perceived risk. I mean, the higher perceived risk you have, like, if you're sitting at a company and you're going to buy like a multi-million dollar project to sort of rebuild something in IT, and you know that if you mess this one up, your job is going to be in jeopardy. You're going to do a lot of your decision making with active involvement, of course, but also interestingly, like David Kahneman showed, that you will do actually a lot of that based on brand, simply on going with the safest alternative you can find, a brand thing. Your perceived risk, of course, lowers when you're buying something very frequently, and if you're not happy, you're just going to buy another one next week. So then you just switch back, right? Zero perceived risk. But the thing is that there are many B2B brands that have low perceived or B2B circumstances with low perceived risk. Like, I mean, if I decide on a vendor for ballpoint pens, it really won't matter. If I'm not happy, I'm just going to switch. There are tons of those. And just because it's B2B doesn't mean that it's always risk avoidance and high stakes and all of that. That's a myth. But the thing that, uh, and conversely, in B2C, a lot of our purchases are actually ones where, okay, maybe not super high perceived risk, but frankly, if you think about a teenager buying, let's say, a pair of sneakers or some apparel or a new mobile phone, I mean, in relation to their spending power, that's a really major decision for them. So it's actually more akin to the sort of risk minimization that we're talking about traditionally in B2B.
Yeah.
And then we come to the real thing that is atypical to everything else, which is FMCGs, fast moving consumer goods, going to the supermarket. That's the anomaly, because that is where we sort of pick 30 brands at a time, mindlessly, no perceived risk, just going on habit. But we tend to sort of put that almost as like the role model for all other marketers, when in fact we should just sort of forget the supermarket as much as we can, because it's typically not what we deal with in any other company.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that plays into the four Ps, doesn't it? And the importance from a marketeer's background. That we're talking about brand, which sits in marketing, which sits in promotion, but place and distribution is so important in terms of getting your product to market there.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And I think that that is also such a great example of why FMCGs are so different. Because if you're not at Tesco, or you know you've lost already, of course. But
yeah,
if you are a software as a service, you typically are you have your own distribution.
yeah,
You're just there on a site. So your dynamic is completely different from an FMCG. So the real differences lie along those axes. Because if you think about it, then that it doesn't matter if it's like B2C, um, because there are software as services like Spotify and things like that. There are their own distribution, and therefore everything changes.
yeah.
So, so I think that we should just forget the B2B, B2C distinction, because it's typically just a meaningless thing,
Yeah.
because we have to look at other dynamics.
I suppose the one thing that we all need to remember is that awareness is the main table stakes, isn't it?
Yeah,
Uh, you know,
everywhere.
and I think making sure that your brand is known, and then yes, confidence, trust, other things play a part, and there are these differences that you just talked about, Matt.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to laser in on brand strategy, as there's been a lot of talk recently about the importance of distinctiveness overtaking brand differentiation. And Jack Trout's book Differentiate or Die put the case forward 25 years ago for differentiation, whilst Byron Sharp's How Brands Grow book made the pendulum swing the other way for distinctiveness. What's your thoughts on this topic?
Oh, I think first of all, I like Mark Ritson expressed the idea of bothism in that, right? That you need both distinctiveness and different perceived differentiation. I would actually take it one step further. They're Siamese twins. They hang together. You can't change one without changing the other. And there was actually an example in Sweden recently where Mondelez, who has like the leading brand of, sort of say, the everyday chocolate, um, they did a redesign, and you could see that they must have had the Romaniuk book open, like constantly during that redesign, because it was like absolutely going for what distinctive assets do we have, how do we make these distinctive assets like play even a larger part of everything, right?
Yeah,
But when it came out, it had like a lot of reactions that it it now looked more down. They looked playful, which I think was intended, but it also looked more childish, and it looked more down market. It looked, frankly, cheaper
right,
to a lot of people. And I think that this is the kind of thing that shows that you can't go about that. Distinctiveness is like a totally separate lever from differentiation, because if you change distinctiveness, that will also carry some meanings to it, because we read things. So that kind of effect will then be like, what is the new meaning? What is the take out of all of this? This is why we brand. This is why we brief designers, yeah, because otherwise we could just say it doesn't matter, just make it distinct. Uh, but most sane people don't, right? They write what they want to achieve with the redesign. So I think that that is the first one. It's a little bit of an artificial fight. I think the second is that I think that the distinctiveness thing is part of the kind of view that swung the pendulum in many other ways than just distinctiveness, and that is that uh, how brands grow, etc., is really about taking the consumer psychology out of the equation. They look at macros. They look at what happens over time when you do certain kind of things, but we leave out the consumer psychology. We leave out what is actually taking place in people's heads. And frankly, I think that that is obviously it will just swing back because after all, if we look at the real success cases out there in the real world from the last decade, all of these things that sort of emerge. Once again, don't just stare at the supermarket shelves, but look at the success stories, the emergent companies. They're stories of disruption. They're stories about breaking new categories, uh, getting new territories to sort of compete in, new usage scenarios, etc. Much more built on product, frankly, than just sort of leveraging communication. So, and that cannot be explained by distinctiveness,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
So I think that the pendulum has swung so far to one side that we sort of have a blind eye on a lot of things that used to be, uh, decades and decades and decades of accumulated experience and knowledge, scientific knowledge at that
Yeah.
about how these things are done. So I think that it's definitely going to swing back.
B2B Frameworks is a curated collection of proven business frameworks to develop your strategic thinking skills, solve your biggest business problems, and unlock your next promotion. Our mission is to help you achieve these goals. We want to create the next generation of successful business leaders by providing the tools and frameworks needed to create effective strategies that drive business growth. Each framework comes with a downloadable set of instructions with large, colourful diagrams and editable templates to guide you through the process step by step and prompt you to consider the problem from every possible angle. Along with audio guides and educational tools, our extensive content library is full of real-world examples and case studies of strategic thinking in action. So why learn with B2B Frameworks? We've carefully curated only the most effective, proven business and marketing frameworks. Our downloadable materials and audio guides will help you easily apply each framework. And the insights and advice you'll find across the site are based on 30 years of consulting experience from one of the world's leading business strategy experts, Paul Haig. B2B Frameworks is a small investment to advance your career or grow your business. Start your journey to becoming a successful business leader by joining B2B Frameworks today. I agree with what you said there, Mats, and I think I'm a big fan of Mark Ritson. I've had him on my previous podcast talking about marketing and branding as well. And you're right. I like the way that he talks about bothism, the fact that it doesn't need to differentiation doesn't need to be in competition with distinctiveness. I think he talks very eloquently, of course, with a few swear words thrown in there, which I like to get the attention of the audience, but. I think he talks about this obsession with unique around differentiation, which is the problem these days. The world has changed and moved. So it's this relative differentiation. This goal is not to be unique, but instead be just more of something than other brands do within that particular category. And I get that. And then throwing some distinctive brand assets in the mix too.
Frankly, I think that whole thing with uniqueness is. I think that it's like maybe if you take like the most extremist positions have maybe been on like sort of really stating that it has to be a unique thing to be a differentiation. But I I'm just amazed over that interpretation because I've been working for 20 years with just perceived differentiation. To me, it's really simple. Like on a 10 graded scale, if you say that is Volvo a safe car, on a 10 graded scale, if you go 8, 9, 10 on anything that they do or any review they get, any sort of safety test they are participating in, they don't have to win every time, but they have to consistently be sort of say outperforming or perceived to outperform. Is a BMW more fun to drive, than other cars? Well, they perceptually reinforce that at 8, 9, 10 all the time. Does that mean that no other car is fun to drive? Of course not. Nobody ever said that.
Yeah.
But this became kind of some weird kind of bracing ground for the argument that differentiation is dead. And I'm just staring at it in disbelief. Like I cannot understand how anybody came up with that. And another thing I would like to add is that if they don't believe that perceived differentiation can exist, how can a consumer choice ever happen then? Because then everything has to be totally mindless.
Yeah.
That, oh, I take the red one, not because of any properties, just because I have just consistently be told that every time I am in for these usage scenarios, I will take the red one. Of course, that is not how people work. So there is just like some real exaggerations in this kind of reasoning that I think is doing a lot of harm, frankly,
Yeah.
because um, yeah. So we kind of need to go back to a few of the more sane interpretations of differentiation and distinctiveness.
Yeah. And this balance between our left and right brain thinking and the emotions, as well as that scientific evidence that we use out there in order to look at data and understand what's happening in the real world.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting. When I did my PhD in the States, I had a prominent professor that was actually a double professor in psychology and heavily into emotion research. And we did a model back there that has been fairly frequently cited actually in cognitive psychology. And basically, it says that you can never turn off your emotional reactions to things, but you can sort of say almost go mindless with your cognition. So you can so instead of just calling things habitual, you still have sort of an emotional system always on. You cannot turn your emotional side of things off,
Yeah.
but you can have more or less rational thought on top of it.
Yeah.
So the sort of system one, system two thinking. But the myth there is that it's two systems that sort of say you have either or, but it is in fact more like one is always on, system one, and then you can have system two also, but they interact.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was interesting in a recent Gartner report that showed that reported marketing budgets have been slashed by 15% from the previous year. But in that same report, 62% of CEOs say that growth is their top priority for the coming year. Now, either the CEOs are magicians in finding growth elsewhere, or they really don't understand the reality of marketing. What's your thoughts on this, Matt?
I've been thinking about this so much because even before I saw the Gartner figure, I mean, this is my experience. I was in a room with like 100 marketers, and I asked them, how many of you are expected to deliver growth next year? And virtually all of them raised their hand. And then I said, how many of you have a budget that corresponds to that? And almost none had it. So this rules out, frankly, the thing that they don't expect marketing to also sort of deliver better results with, sort of say, on the same budget, which is, I think, frankly, tragic and something I would fight. I want to fight, to the end of my days for this. That we have to sort of become more professional about how we view marketing. That marketing cannot expect to magically create more value from the same resources.
Mm-hmm.
It just won't happen. I mean, it can happen with some gradual more efficiency, but it's simply gradual. You will never have disruptive growth uh, just magically happen. That's But I also think that another reason why CEOs and companies tend to be optimistic and then be disappointed at the end of the year over and over is that I think, in fact, it is the kind of thinking that, we used to have some problems, right? But now we fixed them. And a lot of people that sort of rise to CEOs and stuff, that they are optimists. That's probably why they got there, because they think they can do things even when they can't.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a lot of this psychology in organizations that you look back and you say, oh, we went through this, and and our supplier had their factory burned down, and that was horrible. We couldn't get stuff, and then we had this problem that our IT system for our customer service broke down, and people got very upset, and then we didn't dare to sort of launch this sales campaign. And if we had done that, blah, 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 blah. But now we've fixed it all.
Yeah.
So now we're going to grow by 20% just because we fixed this. But what they don't account for is that just by law of probability, they will have more problems next year. So you will stay at the same. You will never sort of fix all your problems. And I think this is where the sort of magical thinking of constant growth without any reason comes from. That's actually this is my current hypothesis that um, they're not. I think that they do believe this themselves, and they do believe they have good reason to think it. But what they don't take into account is that they will have more problems next year,
Yeah.
and they won't know what that is.
Yeah. There was another study I read, a recent McKinsey study that showed that I think it was 70% of Fortune 100 CEOs have an operations or financial background, whereas only 10% of CEOs have marketing experience, and only 4% have previously held a CMO like role. So again, it's feeding into this. No wonder there's a disconnect between the CEO and the CMO.
Yeah,
A lot of them come from an accounting or financial background, don't they, rather than a marketing background.
yeah, and I think that, to be fair, I think that also some of the problem has been that a lot of people have very happily taken on roles as, sort of say, more like head of advertising management. And when you have CMOs that sort of basically happily confine themselves to just thinking about what the advertising should look like, then you lower the expectations from the other people in the company to sort of what marketing really can contribute. So I think it's a two-way thing here. That I think that we sort of have to fight for getting marketing to become marketing again. I want to sound like the Trump slogan, but make marketing marketing again. But I really think that is utterly important because um, it is the prime driver of value after all, to sort of anticipate the future and create the right offer for the customers of the future.
Yeah.
And it is, of course, always going to be a self imposed restriction if that is only going to be about waiting around until we sort of come up with some brilliant creative that somehow would change the game as we play along. It's totally different mindset needed.
Yeah, I 100% agree there, Mats, and actually it feeds nicely into my next question because in the past, the marketing department has sometimes been referred to as the colouring in department, and I say it tongue in cheek, but I do think that the days of building the perfect mix of the four Ps and then throwing it over to the sales team are dead. The marketing department has more information than ever before, more tools, more control than ever before. So they are starting to have more of an influence on the companies that they work for. With that in mind, if you were looking to recruit someone into a CMO role today, what qualities would you be looking for?
Uh, I would, this can be a bit surprising because I think that the number one is how interested are they in business. And I'm saying that because there is typically not at all any problem with finding people who are very sort of interested in communication and interested in trends and novelties and these kind of things, because these kind of people tend to be the ones that get into marketing. But I think that the prime thing is like, how long can they keep attention talking about business without starting to talk about some bloody ads.
Yeah, yeah,
So I would almost like sort of devise some devious test, um, uh, seconds to advertising measurement or something, because and I mean, it's not like I'm slamming down on advertising. I think it's utterly important. It's an enormous force multiplier. But the problem is that if it's seen as like the central thing, of it all,
Yeah.
then it never becomes that lever. It just becomes like, throwing stuff at a wall and see if something sticks a little bit. But you never create like these like really enormously successful and wonderful things by just starting out with hoping that creative will save the day.
Yeah.
So that is why I'm sort of saying that, the more you find somebody that's actually really interested in how a company works and makes money and what kind of other strategic decisions it has to make, what kind of balances it has to do, the better the CMO you will have, I think.
Yeah. No, again, I agree with that, Mats. I mean, I think we've talked, haven't we, about the four Ps already today, and the fact that the CMO's role is not just about marketing, campaigns, advertising, promotion, and I think, especially in today's age, it's in this digital world we live in, it's more challenging, and so it's not just about creative cutting through the noise to make your brand aware. Of course, that's essential for brand building, but it's why maybe it's why we always refer back to B2C brands, like Apple or Nike, who've, that one of those P's is product, high quality products, but also customer experience is my thing. I've written a few books on that, and this exceptional customer service, that's part of the differentiation, if you like, of making
Right.
it stand out from the majority.
That's right. I think I mean, it really is like, I think that we could also put it like this, that it's like, all of these things that you can do to build a brand is like, it's like having a piano in front of you. And if somebody just says like, I'm only going to use like a fraction of it, like I'm only going to use advertising, clink, 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 it won't really be a symphony, will it? Right.
Yeah,
But I think that once you sort of see that I have all these options, I have all these things I can do. And as you said, I mean, you can even see some cases where simply tweaking the internal culture around what kind of value you provide for customers can have a huge leverage without even any kind of sort of say external communication effort can leverage a company by a lot.
yeah, it really can.
I did one thing I'm really proud of once, which was a company that needed to change. They were in retirement fund products, right? So you had like these brokers that would call and sell their products to guys like you and me
Yeah,
and say like, hey, you should put some in the retirement, and here's a good product for you, And these this company had to uh, switch. They had to come up with a new brand because they had been bought and they were sort of they needed they didn't have the rights to the brand anymore. And when we did this, it started like, hey Mats, how are we going to do this? I mean, practically, we don't have the experience on like how to switch our signs and come up with a new logo and all these kind of obvious cosmetic things. And I said, okay, let's look at it. And I said after a while, like, wait a minute, now I understand. You're totally B2B, and you know the names of every single broker that sells your products. So in essence, it's going to be a no-brainer. You're going to have a phone call. Every broker is going to have a phone call that we used to be this, now we're going to be this. Now, here is the opportunity of a lifetime. If you do the right analysis and you tell them why you're going to be much better from here on, you have like the ultimate sales call of the century ahead of you. What do you want to say? And they were like, oh, wow. So we did a strategy job and we came up with what position they were going to be in. They came up with new products. And then they finally on D-Day made that call, right? And they they invited everybody to a party. And then they also rolled out the products, followed up, and they increased their turnover by 20%, just like from one day to the next. It was like this.
yeah,
And since it's pension fund stuff, I mean, it was billions.
yeah,
And it was really not advertising driven at all. It was simply going down to the very basics, like how do we compete? What has really been missing? What is our opportunities? What are we going to do? and then sort of condense that down to the opportunity of putting that into a rebrand.
Yeah.
So that I think was a really cool case for using the whole keyboard, but actually not using the whole keyboard. In this case, it was like playing rock and roll on certain parts, right?
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
was great.
Well, and I think it's a great example of, B2B. We're not selling to the millions. We're selling to the, hundreds, maybe thousands, but the few in comparison to B2C brands, and that importance of the personal sell. That human interaction,
Yeah,
which is sometimes lost in the digital world that we're in today.
absolutely.
Yeah. This podcast is sponsored by B2B Frameworks. And Mats, you've sat on both sides of the fence, having taught MBA students as well as advising clients for Georgson and Co. and being global brand director for both Ericsson and Sony. I'm sure you've therefore used many frameworks over the years in your line of business. What's your favorite business framework and why?
A business framework. Well, I think, as I said earlier, my my core framework is to have vision, business strategy, brand strategy, and culture sorted. Because, as I said, my learning is that these four cover so much. In essence, you don't need anything else to sort of confuse people, bore people, or feel like they are treated with corporate bullshit, so to say. So that is, I think, one framework that I insist on using uh, to reduce and sharpen whatever they are doing. I think when it comes then to how to put it into practice in more marketing terms, I simply construct tailor-made frameworks for that, which is in essence like a stupefyingly uh, simple idea, because at the very far end you say like, okay, we want to make money, we make money because our customers behave certain ways. I mean, they buy with frequency, they buy at premiums, etc. To get there, we need to push the brand up in various indicators, and in order to do that, we need to sort of establish something that makes the brand selectable and likable, etc., and is also the basis for creating that distinctiveness and all of that. And the trick is to sort of move gradually. And here is where so many go wrong, because out here is like the end states that we all want to attain, but they're fairly meaningless to discuss. It's the road there, and using the kind of words where we're not just putting a lot of superlative adjectives on top of one another, but actually starting to become selective and granular about what kind of experiences people should really get out. And then you gauge all actions, anything that you do in the business against this. And then you can very simply create a measurable model of the reality of any company without going into like hysterical nitty gritty of specific theoretical frameworks or whatever. You can use everything to sort of put together something that fits one company. And you can do it fairly easily. And also, it's very transparent and simple to look at. So I tend to do that.
Yeah. And here are you talking, Mats, around a bit of a more granular version, obviously looking at the ADA model from a macro perspective and then mining the detail underneath that to understand at each level, what makes them interested, what's going to make them turn towards that particular brand, how we're going to build that awareness all the time with the fact of, we're focusing on the end game, how to make money, then making action and choosing a
Yeah.
particular brand.
I think it's about the granularity and sort of how to realize how it can be implemented in various ways. I mean, for instance, one of my formative things was like when I worked with these mobile phones at Ericsson and Sony Ericsson, and I desperately tried to sort of get attention from the product people that they could be briefed on like what kind of experiences we wanted, right? And this is where I first discovered that Einstein Chaplin paradox. I couldn't go in there and say, hey, uh, how is everybody doing today? I'm in charge of the brand, and can you please just make something that is creative and innovative and have good design?
Yeah.
And I mean, people would just have slaughtered me, right? I mean, they would be like, this is like the most useless person in the company, get rid of him. So I had to break it down into something that they could act on. And what that looks like to product people is not exactly the same kind of thing that I can then take to the, say, ad agency to create a communicative concept to go with this brand. And this is how I started sort of thinking about one has to be able to do general things to be able to break them down into the specific things and also judge, like, what kind of things should be more up to the ad agency and what should be more up to the product people, but what things should be constant. So this is the kind of thing I've been working on for like 30 years, is how to make these kind of things actually happen. And I'm not saying it's easy even after 30 years, but I've kind of figured out at least why it's hard and what one can do about it.
Yeah.
So
I'd like to conclude today, Mats, by finishing up with the quickfire questions. First of all, what are you reading at the moment?
I I really appreciate you giving me a heads up on that one, so that I could show you, because I always forget. But this one, Energy and Civilization by Vaclav Smil.
Okay, I've never.
It's a really cool book about, basically it's kind of like a economic history from how much energy it takes to actually do things and how that affects society. Like,
Right.
what happens when you put a horse on a field and everybody thinks, oh, a horse can work, is stronger than a human, right? But that's not the point. The point is that the horse can work more for his energy than humans can. So that when you put a horse on a field, the whole point is not that the horse is stronger. It's simply that he's more efficient. So you can then have a larger surplus from your field, and then things happen to society when you have a bigger surplus from agriculture. So he kind of goes over everything in terms of like energy in and energy out and how that has affected society, because that creates surplus. It's a lovely way to sort of understand business as well.
I'll have to search that one out then, Mats. I've not heard of that book. So, well, you're a co-author of the globally most widely used textbook on the subject of strategic brand management with Kevin Kellers. So, in terms of a business book, what's the best business book that you'd recommend our listeners to read?
I would say this: I had a course for many many years in brand strategy, but I did it as a course in brand strategy and corporate strategy. So I mentioned Mintzberg earlier, and he wrote a book called Strategy Safari, which goes through the history basically of corporate strategy as a academic discipline, and shows, among other things, why strategy is not about creating these kind of 5-year plans, uh, and that it's instead actually understanding, for instance, like uh, what kind of patterns does a company have in making certain decisions when things are changing, etc. So it's a very fresh take on. If you read that, you kind of understand how much more it is to strategy than just saying that like it's a 5-year
Okay.
plan kind of thing. Yeah.
You're obviously widely read, Mats. But what's the best piece of business advice you've ever been given?
I think I think I must say this one, that I was I was young. I was only like, I don't even think I had turned 30, but I had already sort of a pretty good career. And then like one of the top management guys took me aside and said, Mats, I just want you to understand one thing. There is no sort of secret room in this corporation where you have like a lot of wise men sitting around. He said men, excuse me, or women, but he meant as in humans, but a lot of wise people uh, sitting and just making like perfect decisions about everything. It's really important that you give your best shot at everything you're doing here, and sort of tell us what you think should be happening. And that kind of, to me, was kind of one of the best pieces of advice I ever got, that I kind of realized. And then, of course, when you get more experience, you validate that that's exactly how it is. Like nobody has all the answers. So every company is really dependent on a lot of like really engaged people doing their absolute best
Yeah.
to advance the company. And after that, I just lived by that. That I mean, with humility, but I mean, I always try to chip in and make things better.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Which business leader do you most admire?
You know, I love that question, and I would say uh, my heroes are frankly the many faceless business leaders that sort of start a little modest operation in a very competitive field and just manage to not just survive but actually thrive. You know, the kind of tobacconist that after you know a few decades has not just one tobacco shop but actually now has five. I really admire those guys that beat all the odds and somehow find ways to sort of advance through that. I admire that somehow more with my heart than well educated, smart uh, people that sort of get venture capital and become billionaires. To me, there is something like really endearing with the people that just really slug it out and outcompete others by just working at it and very often being innovative, even if we don't talk about it in the business books.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and and I suppose the change in health and view on tobacco as well these days. I've seen some of these tobacconists that are changing their tact and having multiple businesses under one roof, into
Yeah, yeah,
counter that.
that too. I mean, to me, tobacconist was, of course, just an example, but I think what you're mentioning is exactly what I love. That far below sort of the high stratosphere of business books and podcasts and all of that is like the daily struggle of a lot of unsung heroes that actually are really, really good at everything that we're talking about every day
Yeah,
because they're there and they're doing it every day.
yeah, yeah. And I suppose we both know that from running agencies and the
Yeah.
running a business and staying afloat. And finally, who would you like me to reach out to, Mats? Who would you be interested in hearing on the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast?
I think you should talk to Konrad Bergstrom from Sweden. He's a serial entrepreneur. He founded, among other things, like Urban Ears. They were like the pioneers of colorful headphones and
Right.
very early in the whole headphones hype thing. And they also um, did Marshall headphones.
Okay.
And in fact, that company in the end acquired Marshall, like the old Marshall with the PA systems and stuff like that. But he's moved on and now he's making electric boats, like the Tesla on water, so to say. And he's like, a certified cool dude as well. So I think you should really get him aboard.
Well, that sounds like a fascinating story to follow up on. So I'll definitely take your recommendation, Mats, and take his details and follow up on that.
Cool.
Well, Mats, you're speaking to me for those that you can see on the YouTube channel. You're speaking to me from your Swedish summer house. So thank you for the hour that I've interrupted into your time there, and for joining me today. We've covered a lot of topics relating to strategy and business building. We started today by setting a North Star vision, aligning our business strategy against that so that we could deliver against that vision. And then we talked about the importance of marketing, the fact it's the lifeblood of any company to promote their products and services. But we argued the case that brand management is one of your organization's, any organization's most important assets, as it gives you this identity, it makes you memorable, encourages consumers to buy from you, and supports marketing and advertising and employee engagement along the way. And then we finished on talking about the evolution of marketing and the importance of the role of the CMO. So lots and lots we've covered there. But if anyone does have any additional questions or wants to get in touch with you, Mats, how best do they get in touch with you?
They can ping me here LinkedIn, or they can, of course, just send me an email. We can put that in the comments under this podcast, maybe.
Of course we can. Of course we can. Well, thanks again for joining me, Mats. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. A great conversation today about marketing and branding and strategy. So thanks again.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
This podcast has been brought to you in partnership with Awards International. Awards International is dedicated to running successful business awards programs and conferences. Founded in 2008 by Don Hales and Neil Skihel, the company's core mission centers on honoring and celebrating exceptional achievements in customer and employee experience, but also in overall business excellence across diverse sectors. In addition, their aim is to showcase best practices, innovations, and achievements that contribute positively to these areas, ultimately inspiring other organizations to improve their own customer experience, employee engagement strategies, and overall business success. To find out more about Awards International and how to register your interest in their awards programs, check their website www.awardsinternational.com.